we will try to finish this discussion within this session itself. But basically, when we discuss means of knowledge, what does Buddhism say about it? What are the means of knowledge? Now, we can look at this from two different perspectives. One perspective is the traditional Indian logical and philosophical method. The other is just looking at the Buddhist tradition itself. What does the Buddhist tradition say? But because the Buddhist tradition is a part of greater Indian tradition, we have to know how it should be located within the greater Indian tradition. Now, this first slide says Nyaya tradition accepts 4 means of knowledge. Now, Nyaya is one of the 6 philosophical traditions, Shat Darshana, developed in India. I think I referred to it yesterday also in my discussion. Now, Nyaya is the main tradition. Now, when Nyaya talks about the means of knowledge, it talks about perception, inference, comparison and authoritative word. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana and Shabda. Now again, Shabda here means the divine revelation. The Buddhist tradition accepted perception and inference, and materialist accepted only perception. Now you see, this is basically a very brief summary of the means of knowledge in the Indian tradition. However, here we are talking about general philosophical picture. If you take the philosophical picture, we start with Nyaya, and Nyaya accepted perception, inference. Now comparison is, you compare with something, some object with another object, some idea with another idea, and you look at the comparison as a means of knowledge. But that is not philosophically very deep or anything, and then not too many people have accepted this subsequently. But the authoritative word Shabda, in my first part of the discussion, we talked about the divine revelation and the Veda. This basically means the Shabda. So, Nyaya being mainstream Hindu tradition, they had to accommodate Shabda, divine revelation also in the list. And then, but basically, perception and inference, pratyaksha and anumana. Now, in our discussion, you will see this perception inference kind of roughly go as empiricism and rationalism we discussed so far. Now, perception is very clearly the empiricism we discussed, but the inference is anumana. Anumana is anumana. We do that through our rational thinking, so therefore inference comes very close to rational thinking. So this is basically what the Nyaya tradition accepted. And then when we come to Buddhist tradition, again I am talking about the Buddhist tradition as a philosophy, accepted perception and inference. Pratyaksha and Anumana has been accepted in the Buddhist tradition. And then materialist tradition accepted only perception and not even inference. Now this is roughly the philosophical picture. However, let me go back to the past. Now this philosophical picture comes later, okay? But before that we have the discourses of the Buddha, and we will see what these, what the discourses say about these things. Now here, Buddha refers to 3 sources of knowledge in the discourses and identifies himself with the third. Number 1 is traditionalist, Anussavika. Number 2 is rationalist, Takki Vimansi. Number 3 is experientialist. In Pali, it's described as Pubbe Ananusutesu Dhammesu Samanyeva Dhammang Abhinyaya. Pubbe Ananusutesu Dhammesu Samanyeva. Samanyeva means Samang Eva. Samang Eva means by oneself. Samang Eva Dhammang Abhinyaya. This comes in the Sangarava Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya number 100. So here you see Buddha categorizing the means of knowledge during his time. So Anussavika, you remember in the Kalama Sutta we looked at Ma Anussavena. So Anussavika are basically referred to the Vedic tradition or the Brahmanic tradition who accepted the divine revelation. Now when we say Anussavika, it can be anything, Brahmana or non-Brahmana. But during the time of the Buddha, as far as evidence go, Brahmins were the only people who believed in kind of divine revelation, not others. So therefore by Anussavika, Buddha may have meant basically the Brahmanic tradition. And then the second is Takki Vimansi. Takka is translated into English as logic. Takki is a person who is using logic. Vimansati means investigate. So the investigator and logician. Now what it means is, in fact, some people came into certain views not through divine revelation, not through personal experience, but simply by rationally and logically arguing about it. Very good example is for you to go back to Brahmajala Sutta. Now in the Brahmajala Sutta you have 62 views. Among these 62 views there are Ubbantakappika, Aparantakappika, pertaining to past, pertaining to future, and so on. However, in each of these lists, you see something very interesting. Very often people came in to hold these beliefs because they had some kind of experience. But then among these groups, always you have the last group as Takki Vimansi. So there is always one group came to those, hold those ideas due to logical reasoning. So you don't have any experience or anything, you don't have any divine revelation, you simply accept these things for the logical reasoning. So please look at Brahmajala Sutta, then you will see how people came to hold, for example, the materialism. People came to hold also, there were other reasons, but in addition to those things, people came to hold this view due to Takki Vimansi. The last and the most important in this context is translated as experientialist. In fact, these three terms, traditionalism, experientialist, rationalist, these three terms I borrowed from Professor K.N. Jayathilaka in his early Buddhist theory of knowledge. They're not my terms, but this is how he discusses this particular statement, and these are the names given by K.N. Jayathilaka to these traditions. So traditionalist, rationalist and experientialist. Now experientialist is Pubbe Ananusutesu Dhammesu, on the phenomena that you did not hear before, that you did not know before, Samanyeva, by oneself, Samanyeva, Dhammang Abhinyaya, knowing the Dhamma. So here Samanyeva Dhammang Abhinyaya, knowing by oneself. Now that is different from other two. Other two comes either divine revelation. So divine revelation always have an external source. It doesn't belong to you. Intellectually, experientially, it is not a part of you. It comes from outside to you. And then Takki Vimansi, rationalism is you just follow certain rules of logic and you come to certain conclusions. Okay? Now, those are the two things. However, Samanyeva Abhinyaya means when you know for yourself means totally different story. So you have your personal understanding of something. Okay. So in the Buddhist tradition, I think this particular aspect is very important. We will go a little bit deeper into this aspect. This I am not going to discuss, but here what is important is I tried to. Kalama Sutta has 10 different reasons, but these 10 different reasons can be categorized in main themes. Now, number one is Anusavika traditionalism. In the Kalana Sutta, Buddha refers to the following four as relevant to this category. He says, Ma Anusavena, Ma Paramparaya, Ma Itikiraya, Ma Pitaka Sampadanena. Now, all these four things are pertinent to traditionalism. Now, first one, Ma Anusavena, we discussed already. However, Buddha says something very interesting in the Chanki Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 95. Buddha says Buddha compares this to a Andha Veni Parampara. Veni means bamboo. Parampara means one after the other, holding it. Andha Veni Parampara means blind group of people holding to a bamboo. Now, it looks like in the ancient time, blind people, when they are walking, for them to not get lost, they just held into a bamboo. But the funny thing is, in this bamboo parampara, bamboo sequence, the beginning person doesn't see, middle person doesn't see, the last person doesn't see. Nobody sees. Okay? But everybody. So Buddha says that this Vedic tradition is something like Andhaveni Parampara, like nobody sees. That means the person who began this tradition doesn't see, person who were in the middle of this tradition don't see, and then persons who were last in this tradition don't see. So they just go by the tradition. Okay. So Buddha's criticism is that Andhaveni Parampara. And then more importantly, he says this can be, you go to tradition because that is something you have heard. So it can have, Buddha uses this word. Actually, many of these things have twofold consequence. Buddha says, Dvidha Vipaka. Dvidha Vipaka means twofold, two consequence. Now, two consequence means it can be well heard or ill heard. It can be true or false. Now, this is something very interesting. This is something you have heard, something revealed to you. Now, this something you heard could be something you heard well or something you heard ill, in the sense, something you did not hear very well, or something you heard, but of course it is not very well said. So it could be two things, Sussutta or Dussutta. Pali terms are Sussutta, Dussutta. It can be Sussutta, well heard, or Dussutta, it can be not well heard. Tatha Anyatha, it can be true or it can be false. Now, one thing you can see is something very important. Buddha did not reject the Anussava in toto. Buddha did not reject Anussava completely. What the Buddha says is, Anussava can be true or false. Anussava can be something well heard, or Anussava could be something not well heard. Now, the funny thing is, there is no way that you can know whether it is true or false. It could be true, but you don't know. It could be false, you don't know. Now, intellectually, you are in a very bad shape, because if you don't know your means of knowledge for sure, then how can you be sure about your knowledge? Suppose you are going by the Anussava, Vedic tradition, but you don't know really whether it is true or not. So, in other words, what I want to tell you is, Buddha did not reject these things completely. Okay? So, Buddha accepted that it could be possible that certain things are good, certain things are true, but how do you know it? So, in order to know, if you need to have the service of another means of knowledge, then of course this means of knowledge is not reliable, right? So that is unsuccessful. Do you get my point? Like if you want to get the help of another means of knowledge in order to ratify this knowledge, then of course it's problematic. I mean, either you accept Anussava as it is, but if this is Dvidha Vipaka, it has two consequences. it can be either well heard or ill heard, it can be either true or false, then what happens is you need to have another criterion to decide it. But whenever the moment you go to another criterion to decide, you accept the failure of this particular criterion, right? So Anusavika is not complete in that sense. Okay, then we have Ma Parampara, Ma Itikira, Ma Pitaka Sampadanena, all these things pertinent to traditionalists. And then we have Takki Vimansi. There Buddha says, Ma Takka Hetu, Ma Naya Hetu, Ma Akara Parivitakkena, reflection on shape, Ma Ditti, Nijjhana, come to agreement with one's preferred view. Now all these things are more kind of rational thing. You accept something because it is logical. You accept something because it goes along with what you believe, what your preferred view. You accept something, it is not only logical but methodical. Or you accept something, you look at the structure of something, and then if the structure is good, shape is good, then you accept it. Now all these things are pertinent to Takki Vimansi. Now again you can see that something can be Takki, logical, but something logical may not be true or false. Okay. Now it is something logical can be actually true or false. So one thing is logically true, logically false. So you have this. You have logical, then you have true. You have logical, false. Not logical, true. Not logical, false. Now you see these are the four positions you can get here. Certain things can be both logical and true. Fine. If something is both logical and something is true, then of course it is very good. So Pali terms is Sutakkitang Tatha. Sutakkitang Tatha. If you want, I can write the Pali terms here. Sutakkitam Tatha. Sutakkitam Anyatha. Then you have Dut Takkitam Tatha, then you have Duttakkitam Anyatha. So these are the four positions. Logical and true, Sutakkitam Tatha. Logical and false, Sutakkitam Anyatha. Not logical and true, Duttakkitam Tatha. Not logical and false, Duttakkitam Anyatha. Now these are the four positions. So mere logicality, mere fact that something is logical does not guarantee that it is true. On the other hand, simple fact that something is not logical doesn't mean that it is false necessarily. So not logical can be true, logical can be false. Now what is logic actually here? Why logic and truthfulness don't go together? Now you have to understand this. Basically what we mean by logic in any context, either Eastern or Western, we approve certain rules to be the norm of the rational thinking. So if you are rationally thinking, then we say you have to follow these rules. However, these rational thinking rules usually we make. So human beings make these rules. Now these rules, okay, then you can say what you say is logical. That means what you say is correct according to the rule. But something correct according to the rule may not be true. Now very often in the legal cases, we look at whether you can prove it or not. Sometimes, the case is that everybody know that this particular person did it, but you can't prove it. You can't prove means you can't logically prove it. Now if you cannot logically prove it, then what happens? This person is acquitted. You can't punish him. Although you know that he did it. Now the matter is that it is not logically proved. Simply by not being able to prove it logically, you have to send the person as innocent person, although you know that that person is not innocent. Okay. Now this shows that the logicality doesn't guarantee truthfulness all the time. So now this is the problem with logic according to Buddhism. So something can be logical but doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be true all the time. It could be false or even not logical. Not logical means something that doesn't follow the logical rules. Actually, in my methodology class later, I will be talking about two concepts, valid argument and also sound argument. I'm not going to discuss that here today, but basically this has something to do with validity of an argument and the soundness of an argument. I will come to that later. So these are what the Buddha said about the so-called rationalist. This is the problem of that. And then we have, relevant to this category, person as authority, two aspects are mentioned, ma babbharupataya, ma samanono garo. Appearance of being probable, babbharupata. You take an idea and you see whether this idea is plausible idea, whether it can happen. Then you go by that. And then the other one is respect for the teacher, ma samanono garo. This samanono garo, this particular Samana is our teacher, don't go by that. And then what I asked, what is the role and place of Saddha in Buddhism? Amulika Saddha and Akaravati Saddha. This goes along with, now when we say Buddha says don't go by the person, then the problem is, what is the role of Saddha? Now what is Saddha in Buddhism? Saddha is trust, usually translated as faith. Now the interesting thing is, why Buddhism says that Saddha is needed. Now, Saddha is basically, you have the Saddha in the Buddha, Saddha in the Dhamma and the Sangha. Now, what is Saddha in the Buddha basically? Saddha in the Buddha means actually you believe, you trust what the Buddha says. It is not about the Buddha as a person really. Saddha means, you trust what the Buddha says. In fact, it ultimately melts down to you trust what the Buddha says. You trust the word of the Buddha. In other words, you trust the Dhamma. Right? So, now what is the role of Saddha in Buddhism? Now, if Buddha says that don't go, respect for the teacher. Now, what is the role of Saddha in Buddhism? Is it not the respect for the teacher? How do we get Saddha? How do we do this? This is another very important question. We are not going to, have an answer to all these questions, but basically when we talk about the Buddhist tradition, we can see that, Buddhism has a longer discussion on that. Let me see whether I have, okay, we'll go back. This whole issue about Saddha as the prerequisite of religious action is something very clear in the Buddhist tradition. You always start with Saddha. It is because of Saddha, the trust, you follow the Buddha. Okay? However, Buddha makes it very clear, there is a clear distinction between two things. One thing is Amulika Saddha and the other one is Akaravati Saddha. Amulika Saddha is the Saddha without root. Amulika, without root, no basis. Like, you trust somebody just by looking at the person. You trust somebody just believing somebody else said about this person. That's not a very good reason, but you just try. Or the person is good looking. You trust that person. That kind of things happen in society all the time. So, you trust people for not very good reasons. Now, Buddhism describes these things as Amulika Saddha, no root. But then the second one is Akaravati Saddha. Akaravati Saddha means, is translated as rational faith or rational trust. Now, Akaravati means you trust somebody for the correct reasons. Now, whether you have Akaravati Saddha or whether you have Amulika Saddha, there is no doubt that you have to have Saddha. Saddha means trust. Now, why do you have to have Saddha? Why do you have to have Saddha in Buddhism, particularly if you are talking about Buddhism? Now, you know, something very important, you have to understand the nature of the Dhamma. Now, we have become Buddhist because our parents were Buddhist. Our parents have become Buddhist because their parents were Buddhist. You know, it's like that. But just imagine a situation when Buddha was teaching the Dhamma in ancient India. Just imagine the situation when Buddha was teaching Dhamma in the ancient Indian society. Now, did the Buddha have Buddhists to listen to him? Who are the people who listen to the Buddha? Were they Buddhist? No, they were not Buddhist. So Buddha was saying something, Buddha was teaching them. And Buddha says that, okay, life is like this. And Buddha says that if you follow this, you will attain Nirvana. Now the problem is, have you attained Nirvana when you listen to it? No. But Buddha says that your life is like that, it is suffering, but if you follow this path, you will attain Nirvana. But how do you know? How do you know? You have not attained Nirvana. Buddha says that there is something called Nirvana, you can realize that and you can end suffering. Now look at the situation. If you are listening to the Buddha for the first time, if you have your own religion by that time, now accepting what the Buddha says means you have to give up your religion, your belief, and then you have to come to believe what the Buddha says, and then you have to live as Buddha says. Now isn't that the really huge thing? For you to change your belief and accept what the Buddha says and then follow that in your life without really realizing the Nirvana. Now, you know, you are in a very serious situation, which is not very easy. On the one hand, if you don't trust what the Buddha says, and if you don't do what the Buddha asks you to do, you will never see the Nirvana. Right? But then you have to trust what the Buddha says. So you are really going without your knowledge. So here we can see something very interestingly. There are two things going on here. One thing is you trust something that still did not happen. So what you have is the trust. So on the one hand, what you do is you have Saddha here. You have Saddha here. You trust what the Buddha says. However, how do you trust? Because you have not achieved Nirvana. But Buddha says that you will achieve Nirvana if you do that. So if you don't do it, you will not achieve Nirvana. In order to do it, you have to give up your belief system right now, and then you have to do something new. I mean, it's a risky thing. You are taking a risk. You are giving up your present belief system, and then you are accepting something to do. How do you do that? Now, unless you have Saddha or belief, you will never get it. But how do you develop Saddha? Now, that is where this Amulika and Akaravati Saddha becomes important. I mean, without Saddha, without trust, you can do. Even you think about a minor thing. From here, you want to go to, say, Yangon by bus. You have to get into the bus and give the money to the person and trust the driver to take you to Yangon. But do you really surely know that you will be able to go safely to Yangon by this bus? You don't know.
No.
But unless you trust, you will never get into the bus. You are taking a risk. But then you will look at the bus company is good, the driver has been a good driver, so all the past records and all these things, of course we don't do these things, but suppose I am very, very fussy about this, curious, then I will look at okay, what kind of bus company is this? What kind of drivers are they? Are they very well trained? And all these things we looked at. But finally, okay, you get into the bus. Trusting that this bus will take you safely to your destination. But only when the bus goes to the destination, you know that it was good, right? Otherwise, you will not know it. So in other words, you have to do it in order to know it. Isn't it? In our whole life, you are taking some risk. Everything. You go to a restaurant and you order something to eat. How do you know that the person will not poison you or something? But we don't trust, we don't think so. We order food and we eat. But we have a trust, right? But sometimes food can go wrong. But we don't know unless we eat it. So any minor thing in our daily life, in order to do, some kind of trust is involved. You come here thinking that class will be here. But if the class is not there, your trust is gone. But unless you come, you don't know it, right? So, like that. Now, I will tell you a story from the discourses. There is a discourse in the Sanyutta Nikaya. It calls, it's called sometime Nagara Sutta, sometime it's called Purananjasa. I think the name of the sutta is Nagara Sutta. In this Nagara Sutta, it talks about Purana Anjasa. Purana means ancient. Anjasa means path, or you can say road. So it talks about Purana Anjasa, ancient road, Nagara Sutta. Now this Nagara Sutta has something very interesting. Story is this. This one man going around in the jungle, he comes across a abandoned road. So in this abandoned road, he just goes alone, and then he gets into an ancient city. Okay, and then he looks around this ancient city, and he saws some ancient buildings and things like that. Then he comes back to his village, and he tells people, go to the jungle. In that jungle, there is an ancient abandoned road. If you follow that road, you will end up in an ancient city. And then you go around in the ancient city and you can enjoy. So, he tells people. Now, the first person who went there, he discovered this road, and then he telling others how to go there. Now, if people don't believe this man, will people go there? No, people have to believe this man. But on the other hand, if we know that this man has been a liar all the time, then are you going to believe him? No. We are not going to believe him. But on the other hand, if this person has been a reliable person so far, and then if you trust this person, things said by him up to this point, then what you do is you are going to trust this man. And then trust and follow the path, and then you also will end up in that. Now, Buddha gives this simile. This is very important because Buddha is like this man. Buddha discovered the Eightfold Path. That's the Purana Anjasa, ancient path. Why it is called ancient path? This is the same path, same road followed by all the previous Buddhas. So it is an ancient road Buddha discovered. And then by following this ancient road, you end up in ancient city, which is called Nirvana. Now, Buddha is like the pioneer. Pioneer is a person who goes there first. He doesn't have a teacher. He just discovers this by himself, right? And then he goes there, and then he comes to the village, to the people, and tell people how to go there. And if people trust him, then people will follow the path he said. People will be ending up in the same city, ancient city. Now, this is comparable to Buddha's case. Buddha is like this person who discovered the ancient path. And Buddha comes to the people and say, this is the path, and this is where you get. Now, people have to trust. Unless you trust, you will never get there, right? Unless you trust, you will never get there. But how are you going to trust? So you can use your rational faculty to see whether this man says can be true, whether it is plausible, whether it could happen, all these things, whether this man has been a liar or whether this man has been a truthful person. Having looked at all these things, but finally you place faith on the Buddha. So when you are placing faith on the Buddha, you cannot really turn back, because there you are, you have accepted to follow it. So this particular is called Akaravati Saddha. Akaravati Saddha is what is called rational faith, because you trust the person, but you trust the person for rational reasons. Now, when you start, you have faith, but however, when you proceed, gradually you come to know what the Buddha said is true. Or gradually you come to know what this man said is true. Right? So then what happens is, finally, when you get to the city, then more you follow the path, your knowledge goes up, it goes up, it goes up. Finally, when you come to here, then you have knowledge. But when you have knowledge, you don't need to have saddha anymore, because there is nothing to trust. Now, trust or faith and knowledge are two different things. If you know, then there is nothing to trust. Now, this is why in the discourses you find, when someone becomes an arahant, realize what they know is Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, Swakhato Dhammo, Supatipanno Sangho. Now, these three things you know. Now, you follow the path taught by the Buddha, and then you go to this destination, and then you know that, Buddha is fully enlightened. Dhammo Swakhato. The Dhamma he taught is Swakhato, well said. Because Dhamma is like the road map. Dhamma is like the road description. So you follow the path. So you know that if you safely went to the destination, you know that road is correct. So Dhammo Swakhato. And then Sangho Supatipanno, and then you have Sangha who say that they realize this. But now you know that, because you also realize it, you know that what the Sangha said is true. So ultimately, about Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha, you have Akaravati, you have complete knowledge. When you have knowledge, of course, there is no need for saddha. So, but the saddha and panya are very important. You start with saddha, you end up in panya. Okay. So in the Buddhist tradition, this person as authority is intimately connected with this idea of, how do you, intimately connected is how do you know it, and also intimately connected with the idea of, the knowledge. So without saddha, you can't follow the path. Without following the path, you will not get there. But once you get there, you know that saddha is no needed anymore, because you have panya there. Okay. Now this is basically, you can see. Now another important thing is experience as a means of knowledge. Now Buddha talks about samanyeva abhinyaya. Now samanyeva abhinyaya, Buddha talks about sensory experience. There I have referred to this sutta called Sabba Sutta that comes in the Sanyutta Nikaya. What, O monks, is everything? Sabba. Eye and forms, ear and sounds, nose and smell, tongue and taste, body and contacts, mind and concepts. This, O monks, is everything. If one were to claim that he would reject this everything and establish another everything, his claim would be just babbling. Babbling means nonsensical talk. Nor would he be able to convince upon being questioned. Furthermore, he would be frustrated. The reason, O monks, is that such another everything is beyond one's perceptual limits. Avise Sanyutta Nikaya. Now it is very interesting, Buddha talks about perceptual knowledge. Everything, sabba, everything is ultimately that comes within your sensory perception. I think I pointed to you this even my yesterday's discussion. Usually, according to Buddhism, we can talk about the world meaningfully in so far as we know about the world. In so far as we know about the world through our senses. Otherwise, we can't talk about meaningfully, because it's not our experience. So the world, suppose I don't have any of my senses, then the world doesn't exist to me. But if you have senses, you have your world. But my world doesn't exist because I don't have access to know. You may say about things, but it's not my personal experience. So, the Sabba Sutta is a very, very important sutta which gives the limit of our world. Our world is, basically limited by our perception. However, this extra sensory perception, abhinya, it is at this stage, Satyanupatti mentioned in Chanki Sutta becomes applicable. We will come to Satyanupatti concept later. So the extrasensory perception, abhinya, is, you may think, if the world is what we perceive, what about Dibba Sota, Dibba Chakku? In fact, in the Buddhist tradition, when you develop your faculties, when you develop your eye, you can get Dibba Chakku. But if you don't have your fleshy, ordinary eye, you cannot develop Dibba Chakku. If you don't have your ordinary ear, you cannot develop Dibba Sota. Right? So which means Dibba Chakku, Dibba Sota can go beyond your ordinary perception, but that depends on your ordinary faculties. You develop ordinary faculties through meditation, and then, you kind of see or kind of hear these things. Okay. In other words, what is seen is extrasensory perception that is discussed in Buddhism is based on the sensory perception. Okay. So basically the world is limited by your senses. But your senses can be more developed senses, not like in any materialist philosophy or anything. So on the one hand, you may get the impression that according to Buddhism, the world is limited to what you see, what you hear. In a way it is true. But on the other hand, world is not that narrow, because you can develop Dibba Sota, Dibba Chakku, so you can know about the divine worlds. Now when someone becomes an Arahant, we know that Pubbe Nimasa Anusati, Chutupapata, and then comes Asavakke. Pubbe Nimasa Anusati means you can recollect your own old homes. Pubbe Nimasa, where you lived. That means your past births you can. And then Chutupapata, you can recollect how other people are born and dead. How other people depart from this world and how they are born. That is Chutupapata. Now both these things are results of mental development. But through mental development, you start seeing things that you cannot see through your ordinary eye. Okay? Now, you can develop your mind. By developing your mind, you can know about certain things that go very well beyond your ordinary sensory perception. Okay? So therefore, this extrasensory perception is something very important. Now, before going into this, concluding this, we will go to some important things. We discussed this matter earlier, so I'm not going to discuss it. Personal authority. Now, based on the Chanki Sutta, Buddha talks about methods of discovery of truth. Now, there are three very important concepts. These concepts are Satchanu Rakhana. Second is Satchanu Bodha. Third is Satchanu Upapatti. So, Satchanu Rakhana, Satchanu Bodha, Satchanu Upapatti. Now, when we talk about the Buddhist means of knowledge, this Chanki Sutta is very, very important for you to study. Because Buddha talks about three different stages of acquisition of knowledge. Okay? Now, when you say Satchanu Rakhana, Buddha says Saddha, Ruchi, Anussava, Akara Parivitakka, Ditti Nijjhana Kanti. Now, you are familiar with this term. Some of these terms occurred in Kalama Sutta also. Buddha says, Ditteva Dhammi Dvidha Vipaka. They have two kinds of consequences in this life itself. What are they? Su Saddhahitang Yeva Hoti, Tancha Hoti Rittantu Chabbusa. Now he starts with Saddha. Something can be Su Saddhahitang, well trusted. You trusted something for very good reasons, but still it can be Tuchang, Rittang, Musa, it can be totally empty falsehood. So you trusted it well, but it is false. Now on the other hand, the second possibility is no chepi susaddhahitang hoti. It is not well trusted thing, but still it can be tancha hoti bhutang tachang anannata. It can be really true. So now all these 5 things, saddha, ruchi, anusava, ditti nijjhanakanti, akara parivitakka, all these 5 things can be going both ways. It can be well trusted, false. Not well trusted, but true. Ruchi means my inclination, my liking. It can be my ruchi, can be true. My ruchi can be false. Anusava, the same thing. Saddha, ruchi, anusava, akara parivitakka, you know what it is in the Kalama Sutta, ditti nijjhanakanti. So, satchanurakkhana means at this level, number 1 level, satcha anurakkhana. English translation would be protection of truth. Satcha anurakkhana means protection of truth. Protection of truth means at this level, if you say that this is what I believe, this is what I like, this is what I heard, now Buddha says that's fine. That is satchanurakkhana. Because if you say this is what I trust, Buddha says it could be true, it could be false. But knowing that if you simply say that, look, this is what I believe, this is what I trust, Buddha said that's fine. But that's a very elementary level. You are true to yourself. You don't say it is true, or you don't say it is false. You simply say that this is what I believe. This is my ruchi. This is my anusava. So Buddha says at that level, you are satchanurakkhana. You are protecting the truth, but you are not really committing to it. You are not claiming that it is true. You simply say that this is what I believe. And then satchanubodha. Anubodha means, you can say understanding. Satcha anubodha. Anubodha. Anubujjati is the verb. Anubodha is the noun. Now, how does satcha anubodha happens? Buddha gives a long process. Again, I am not going to describe it too long. But atha tasmin saddhang niveseti. I mean, the saddha jato upasankamati. You go to a person because you have trust. Saddhang niveseti. First you have the trust. You hear that this person is a great person. Saddha jato upasankamati. With saddha you approach that person. Upasankamitva pairupasati. You associate that person. Pairupasanto sotang odahati. When you associate that person, you develop a liking to hear. Ohita soto dhamman sunati. When you develop a liking to hear, then you listen to the dhamma. Sutva dhamman dhareti. You listen and then you memorize, you keep in mind. Datanang dhammanang attang upaparikkati. When you examine the meaning of the dhammas that you remember. Datanang means past participle. Data means remembered. Datanang dhammanang attang upaparikkati. Tatha upaparikkanto dhamma nijjhanang kamanti. When you examine the meaning of dhammas in that manner, dhamma nijjhanang kamanti means dhammas become part of your understanding. Dhammas become part of you. Now here you see the process of beginning from somebody coming to the Buddha or somebody coming to the teacher, sit down, associating, listening, accepting, keeping in the memory, examining, and then finally leading into Dhamma Nijjhanang Kamanti. These Dhammas start becoming part of your understanding. Now that is intellectual thing. That is called Dhamma Anubodha. Now the first thing is you just say this is my ruchi. Dhamma Anubodha is much higher. There you understand the Dhamma. Okay. Now third one, Satchanupapatti. Satcha Upapatti. Upapatti means realization. Upapatti means approach, arrival. So all these things mean Upapatti. Now how do you arrive at the truth? Tesang yeva dhammanang asevana bhavana bahuli kamma satchanupapatti hoti. So tesang yeva dhammanang, very same dhammas which you nijjhanang kamanti, which that came into your understanding. Tesang yeva dhammanang asevana bhavana bahuli kamma. Now it's a total different thing. Asevana, you associate. Bhavana, cultivate. Bahuli kamma, multiply. So up to the second thing, intellectual. Now the third thing is we are talking about the realization, right? So the asevana bhavana bahuli kamma sacchanupapatti, actually sacchanupatti neme, sacchanupapatti hoti. So here you see in this discourse by the Buddha, these three very important steps. Now when we are talking about the means of knowledge, you can see that we are talking about how the Buddhist tradition talks about how you acquire knowledge. Now one thing I wanted to show you was when you read the discourses very carefully, you can see a theory of means of knowledge available in the discourses of the Buddha themselves, okay? We have to look from that point of view. Now this is something very interesting. You start from the particular level of just having some views. Then you go to the intellectual understanding. And then the third is the most important thing, bhavana, bahuli kamma, asevana. Now that's a totally different thing. You develop these things in you and then you become sacchanupapatti. You arrive at the truth. You realize the truth, realization of the truth. Now means of logic in later Buddhist traditions, we take about these things, but I think I'm not going to talk about this thing very much, but basically the Buddhist logicians accepted perception and inference, and then perception they talked about sensory perception and so on. So because our time is passing, I'm not going to go to that aspect. So I'll wind up here. But if you have any questions or comments about the things we discussed earlier or things we discussed now, you can ask. But basically with this, I complete my discussion on the means of knowledge in the Western tradition and also the means of knowledge in the Buddhist tradition. In the course of that, we also discussed a little bit about discussed the means of knowledge in the general Indian tradition and the logical tradition. Particularly this last slide is about subsequent Buddhist logical traditions, so I will keep it for later. If you want, we can discuss later, but I'm not going to discuss today. Okay, so let me wind up with that. And do you have any questions?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You say logical true, logical false, and unlogical true, unlogical false. I want to know why logical false, and why is unlogical true.
Yeah, your question is why a logical thing can be false and why not logical thing can be true. That's a very important question, Venerable. Now, you have to understand the nature of logic. Now, logic is a system developed by us, human beings. Logic becomes logic because we created it. So that is what we think to be the correct method of reasoning. But that correct method of reasoning doesn't necessarily be applicable to everything in the world. Because the nature of the world can be very different from what we think logically. I mean, I will give you a simple example from the modern thinking. Now, suppose you go to courts for something and then you are guilty of something. Then they ask in the court, are you guilty or not guilty? Now, you have to take one of those things. Either you have to say I am guilty or you have to say I am not guilty, right? In the courts, there are only two positions, either guilty or not guilty. However, if you take any situation, you are not 100% guilty. You are not 100% not guilty, right? Suppose it is a motor vehicle accident. Then you go to courts and then they ask whether you are guilty or not guilty. But in a motor vehicle accident, very often both are guilty. But one can be more guilty, other can be less guilty. Or both can be equally guilty. But in the legal language, in the legal logic, you have only two positions. Either you are guilty or you are not guilty. Right? But then, suppose you are 40% guilty, 60% not guilty. How can you say that in logical language? In that logical language, you can't say that. Because you have only two positions, whether you are guilty or not guilty. That's all. Now you see, but that logical tradition is one started by Aristotle. Aristotle's logical tradition we call bivalent logic, or logic of two alternatives. Now, two alternatives are always is something like this. In this logical system, we have true or false. Now, any statement you take, either it has to be true or it has to be false. You cannot have something in between. Okay? Now, but you are in between because you are not completely guilty. You are not completely not guilty. But you don't have something. You see the logic, why logic can be wrong? Because this is the system adopted by Aristotle and this is the system accepted by many people. But that system doesn't completely capture the situation of the world. You know, you can take into many examples like that, because the real situation in the world may be, I mean, something like we talk about, we say something is black, or we say something is not black. The problem is, now we are talking about this particular thing. Is this black or not? Then either we have to say it is black, or we have to say it is not black. But the funny thing is, you know, if you look at this, this is more non-black and little black. But in this logical system, we can't say that. In this logical system, we can't say that. But we can say it is not black. But when we say not black, how many colors are there here? There can be hundreds of colors, right? Only we say is this is black and this is not black. But not black can be red, white, green, or anything, right? Now this is a limitation of the logical system, Reverend. So in a logical system, you can say something logical, but it not be true. If you are 55% guilty and 45% not guilty, then to call you guilty is wrong. But that is the logic. That's the logic. So like that. So something can be logical means something can be in accordance with accepted logical rules, but false. Now that is why if we have a gray area, neither white nor black, how are you going to say that? In logically you can't say that, you know, something like that. Anyhow, thank you, Reverend, for the question. So something can be logically valid, but still may not be true. In my next discussion on, or further discussion on methodology, I will explain to you these two concepts, validity of an argument and soundness of an argument. I think that captures this distinction in a much clearer way. Anything else? I can see that people are full of questions. So, yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
If so, do we need to have amulika?
Well, actually, according to Buddhism, we should not have amulika saddha. The thing is, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that amulika saddha doesn't work. Amulika saddha also can work. But I can see that many people who came to the Buddha, they did not check everything, you know. They simply came to the Buddha and followed him, and then they became Arahant. But we don't need to think that they all started with Akaravati saddha and all that. But you know, Buddha on the other hand thought that when Vakkali was looking at the Buddha's figure, Buddha said, don't look at my putikaya, this filthy body. But Vakkali apparently was very attracted to Buddha's personality. But then, attraction to personality is not a very good intellectual reason. But there may have been people who came to the Buddha because Buddha was good looking. There may have been people who came to the Buddha because Buddha came from a Shakya family. And all these things. But none of these things are relevant things. So those are amulika. But you come for a wrong reason, but of course finally start working well. Okay. Now some people came to find fault with the Buddha. Wrong reason. But of course when they got into the sasana, they became good people. So you know it could. I mean, so the ideal situation is we should not have amulika saddha. But what I am saying is, many people may have come to the Buddha with Amulika Saddha. You don't have a way to examine the Buddha all the time or anything. Like, you go to a doctor. You get sick and somebody says, okay, there's a doctor, you go. So you go to doctor and take the medicine. Amulika Saddha, right? But medicine can work for you. So we do a lot of things in Amulika Saddha. But things go very rarely wrong. Every time you sit to eat, you don't test whether this food is poisoned or not. But ancient kings, they did that because kings were very cautious about their life. But we ordinary people, we just eat. Amulika Saddha. But if you really want to be sure, then you have to test the food. But we are not going to do that. So in all practical matters, Amulika Saddha can be working. You don't need, I'm not saying that we have to have Akaravati Saddha. But what I'm saying is there may have been many people who came to Buddha through Amulika Saddha. But the ideal situation is you have to be convinced. However, important thing is, for whatever reason you came, when you become an Arahant, you know Samma Sambuddho Bhagava. Then you have full knowledge. Yes, sir.
As much as I understand, when we take research, there's two main important empiricism and rationalism. So when we take research, and especially in Buddhist literature field,
Okay.
which thing is most strong?
Okay. Reverend, that's a good question. Actually, I was discussing textual research before I came into these two topics. I'm going back to the continuation of these things. So I'll be talking in detail how do we use these things in the actual Buddhist research. But basically this rationalism, empiricism type research is more applicable to different types of research. But if it is a textual research, there are other things, like as I said in my discussion, whether you want to decide whether a particular text is really taught by the Buddha or things like that, there are certain criteria like coherence. You compare and contrast with other texts and, historical method. And, there are many methods, linguistic method. You analyze the grammar, that sort of thing. However, rationalism and empiricism, the questions related to these things, come in almost any kind of research, not different degrees, not exactly in the same manner. Now, for example, when we take rationalism as a logical way of analyzing, that you can use for anything, even for the textual analysis, you can be logical. Say, for example, like if particular thing is false, then this can't be, true, or both can be false. You can use certain logical concepts in order to sharpen your research. But Reverend, for that, we need to have studied some logical principles, like how basic logic works. So that is very important. But I understand that here you are not taught basically the Western logic or things like that. But we need to have certain understanding of logical rules. Then only we see that some of things, whether they are logical or not. Now what I said just about Aristotelian logic, two-valued logic. When we talk about the four-valued logic in the Buddhist tradition, Chatushkoti, we can really compare and contrast the two, which I will be doing in my Nagarjuna class later. So you can see that, I can't say that, okay, this is exactly how you do the Buddhist studies. But, to be aware of these things, to be aware of these methodical considerations is going to be important in our research in many different ways, okay. Now, for example, experience can be like you collect experience from outside. But just give you an example from the text. Now, how does experience matter in textual research? Now, when you read the text, if you find a particular example, particular word or term occurring so many times, Now that provides experiential evidence for something, right? More you come across that, more possibilities there are it to be more important than the other things. Now that is based on how many instances you come across. Now that is basically, you can say, empiricism, your experience of that by textual reading. So these concepts have to be adjusted to different situations. Okay, but it will be clearer when we go on.
So we can call textual research is empirical research.
Well, textual research is, it can combine both, not purely empirical, but rational also, logical. Because if we apply logical rules to study, but basically empirical research is more like, I will talk to you next time. If you go to society, collect data, I will talk to you about that. Now that is purely empirical. But even to analyze that data, you have to go to logical rules or mathematics. Then it combines both. Okay, I think we are sort of running our time out. So why don't we stop for today? And then next week I will be discussing with you Kathavattu first day, and then the second day I will be discussing Nagarjuna with you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.